If I asked you to get a piece of paper and something to write with, and to make a numerical list of all the things that you would be willing to die for, how long is your list?
Panther 48.
Willing to die for.
Panther 48.
Willing to die for. How long is your list?
What is the tribal self?
Panther
The
48.
tribal self is what goes above the immediate acquaintances of the social.
Willing to die
The
for.
family, the people you know, live next door.
You would be willing
I'm
to
talking
die
about
for.
tribal self.
Panther 48.
I'm talking about those movies, those yet unborn, and those who are the
How
ancestors.
long is your list?
So the connection with the ancestors is tied into the tribal self.
Panther 48.
What does that mean? That means that the tribal self constantly reminds us
Willing to die for.
that we don't have the
How
right
long is your
to
list?
claim independence.
Panther 48.
Go ahead and get started here. All right, power to people, everyone. Also, again, if you want a copy of what we're going to go over and don't already have a copy of being sent to you, put your email in the chat and I'll make sure you get it. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen and we get started here. All right, can y'all see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Affirmative.
All right. Okay, so one of the things I like to start off with and letting everybody know is the idea behind our political education, public political education classes is really to get the people to recognize the importance of accountability and us coming together. It is not a rehash on Panther history, but we do sometimes go over certain aspects of Panther history, but it's about addressing things that we have learned through our experiences as Panthers throughout the legacy of the Panther Party, as well as, again, working to get the people more involved and to see the bigger picture and really where we are and where we stand as a people. So the first thing we have to ask us to deal with in terms of the political education going over tonight is survival pending revolution. This class is built on a lost requirement of pending that has been erased over the decades of counterintelligence attacks. Now that's real important because the theme throughout today is really just addressing the flow and the concept of what does it mean to be pending revolution. So we first have to ask ourselves, is there a alternative to survival? Because most of the time we may not necessarily realize as a people that we are in survival mode. When you're dealing with oppression, when you're dealing with being under attack, when you're dealing with global climate change, and you're dealing with situations in terms of how politics are being dealt with, not just here in the United States, but across the world, humanity at this point is really in a stage of survival. So before moving forward with anything, we have to first envision that this is possible, that there is a possibility to live to have a living, to be living as opposed to just surviving. And so let's separate that. Most of us are in survival mode, where as opposed to living. And living basically means from that standpoint that your basic needs are taken care of to the point to where you're not struggling on a day-to-day to deal with that. You're not consuming and constantly in debt. You're not always worried about stability, always worried about the environment in terms of, hey, are we going to be dealing with fires this week? Are we going to be dealing with mudslides this week? Are we going to be dealing with a lot of the things that could be avoided based upon not only where people decide to live, in terms how we build up the infrastructure of the world, but also how well we take care of the planet. Obviously, the natural disasters happen and will continue to happen on the planet, but to what degree are we participating in creating these situations? To what degree are we destroying ourselves? To what degree are we killing each other? What degree are we dealing with levels of oppression that causes us to not be able to, again, live as opposed to survive? So after a beyond survival existence plausibility is agreed, a working definition needs to be set. And that's the basis for revolution when we talk about that. Getting out of the mode and the climate of being in survival and moving toward living. When you're capable and ready to do that, that in itself is going to spark a revolution as the people recognize their power. And again, looking at this from the perspective of what was done through counterintelligence and what continues to be done on that same method. So we want to establish a few baselines to review, definitions to review for baselines as we approach this. Most people are familiar with these, but let's just, again, we still need to go over this. Imperialism, the policy, practice, and institutional way of life involving extending the rule of authority of an empire or a nation over foreign countries. This evolves the tactical focus of acquiring and holding colonies and dependencies in order to create perpetual control of the resources of the territories, while simultaneously creating dysfunctional governments to prevent the population from overcoming the constraints of control from that empire. And that's the key element when you talk about imperialism. It has to do with creating levels of codependency that constantly perpetuate the cycle of how the people govern themselves, recognize the resources, control the resources, and have the ability to deal with fair trade and operate within stability of how they deal with a society. Capitalism, an economic system in which invests in ownership of the means of production, distribution, and exchange of wealth, is made and maintained chiefly by private individuals or corporations. On the surface, it sounds good. The problem is the human factor of greed tends to take over, and with that comes monopolies, land grabs, and the three corporate evils of exceptions, exclusions, and exploitations. The rich find a way to make everything for sale, and the rich will buy up most of the land, natural resources, and mineral rights. The current trend perpetuates a renter's mentality over the masses and encourages the service SaaS subscription lifestyle, which you don't own, simply renting access. Let me break that down a little bit because that one sneaks up on people a lot. When you look at, especially tying things into the growth of population, tying things into the fact that most of us are living beyond our means. In order to keep us living beyond our means, in order to keep us comfortable with living beyond our means, you create a way for us to still have certain access to things that we want. By doing that, where the trend that is going now is what's called software as a service, hardware as a service, and subscriptions. So whereas in the past we would go out and buy and purchase things, now it's all about you paying for a service to have access to that, but you never actually own the rights. You never actually own the information. This goes into cloud computing. This goes into how a lot of the software, which a lot of people are not familiar with, from a technological standpoint, this is the push to keep raising the communications grade infrastructure in terms of the bandwidth. Why? Because now the central systems, computer systems, can operate, from basically anywhere. And what you have access to at that point is you're computing through the cloud. And by computing through the cloud, basically you don't actually have the data stored or available to you on your own device or in your own storage capacity. What they do is everything is able to be streamed to you direct right away. The problem that comes into that is, again, it sits on a cloud. It sits in an environment to where you are renting access to this information. And by renting access to that information and by replacing the mentality of ownership with the mentality of renting everything, you are actually losing the control and the capability to be in a position to where you recognize and have ownership. And this is a lifestyle. How does that benefit the corporations? It benefits the corporations because basically now what they're doing is they're, over a period of time, you literally end up paying for what you already have access to. It's just like the same thing as you can buy something now or pay an interest rate for it over a period of time and ultimately end up paying for the same thing 2 and 3 folds. Anyway, And not only that, it creates, from the corporate standpoint and the capitalist standpoint, it creates a constant stream of income coming their way. And since they're pinching off you little by little over a period of time, now what happens is that mode of receiving information, receiving data, and being plugged in becomes one of your needs. It replaces the want and becomes a need. You can't live without Netflix. You can't live without these different internet streams or subscription streams that you get. So now what people tend to do, simply because they have access to this stuff now, as opposed to not being able to probably purchase a lot of things like that, you get bogged down with information overload, and you start going back to obviously living beyond your means again. So the trick here is to make you feel as though things are cheap or becoming cheaper, or by eluding you with the greater access to something, but at the same time not recognizing that, well, basically what people tend to do because of our lack of financial overstanding is, what we do is, if we got $300 of so-called extra spending money, we're going to buy up $300 worth of subscriptions. So we still don't save, and we get inundated with data and information and having access and having these things that also, again, keep us in a situation to where now all of our time is also bought up or occupied on the consumerism and on the luxury and on anything that keeps you from being involved in dealing with changing the conditions of a society. So comfort begins to be the controlling factor, and that individualization that you're able to receive through these social media platforms, in terms of creating a virtual environment and creating a nice world perspective around yourself, keeps you from ever having to fight in the fire to ever really do something about the situation. And again, it's like spoon feeding you through that capitalist mentality, spoon feeding you access to things, which creates a renter's mentality. Renters mentality don't care to have ownership, don't care that they are, even from a physical standpoint, owning something as opposed to renting something, because your bottom line concern is that level of comfort and how, and it doesn't matter that it's stretched out. It's even the same when you look at real estate in terms of true ownership. Most people are stuck on the 30-year mortgages. In essence, it's the same thing. The banks own that property until you pay that last payment, period. You can default on a loan the last month of that 30-year note, and it would go right back. It goes to the bank. You're not in possession of that property until it is completely, fully paid. So it creates a renter's mentality.
My bad. But it's
Go ahead,
also
Chief.
another thing that they capitalize off of our mortality rate, because they know that we die at a higher rate more than any other people. So when you die, in that house or that property gets passed down to the next person, you have to pay the fee to be able to even accept that property. And then, if that isn't explicitly, communicated in a will or a power of attorney or something that's formal, then the state is also counting on that to default, or to go into the hands of someone that can't keep up the balance. So it ends up ultimately going back to the state.
And another aspect of just dealing with a renter's mentality, again, goes into the pharmaceutical industry in terms of not creating cures, but actually creating a long-term way to deal with the issues that you're going through. In terms of, basically, we don't want to cure you. What we want to do is make you able to live with your sickness, because there's not money in a cure. There's money in long-term suffering. That long-term suffering is an example, again, of being in survival mode. If you was in living mode, you wouldn't need the medication. You wouldn't need this. So a lot of times it's not meant to create cures. It's just meant to be able to have you to endure longer through your suffrage. So understand that when you talk about these and looking at these from this position, the imperialism and the capitalism approach is all about profit. It's all about profit. Every single way that I can make profit off of you, I will figure out a way to do so. And so that's what we're engaged in and what we're dealing with. So now socialism, a system of social organization that advocates the vesting of ownership and control of the means of production and distribution of capital, land, etc., in the community as a whole. On its basic operation, this prevents the hoarding of resources and regulates a collective and established resource management. It does not oppose personal growth. It opposes the corporate privatization of the means of production and of self-sustainable living, which is what capitalism takes advantage of and uses against you. And so we have to be aware of that. And going back to the very first slide, the bottom line is you have to recognize that you are living in survival mode. No matter how much comfort you think you got, a lot of what we do tend to experience here in the United States is as the result of how the government cripples other nations and other countries and makes every other system look bad and appear to be evil and destructive. Now that has to do again with counterintelligence and counter actions that are deployed that most of us are unaware of. So this, especially now with social media and technology being the way it is very easy to inundate a population with this skewed perception of what really is going on. And as a result of that, the people are being pushed again to individualism. By pushing us toward individualism, we don't see or recognize what it means to have collective power, nor do we see what it means in terms of dealing with that power base from a position of collective governance outside of being, again, pinned down to always needing and always basically living beyond your means and consuming. The idea here is to create a consumption society to where people are always buying things that they don't necessarily need and always trying to keep up with the Joneses. And from there, you go into debt, always trying to make it an easy way to get around being able to deal with living by just constantly keeping you in debt your entire life through one means or another. And that's the basis of how that works. And from that standpoint, before we move on, if you look at capitalism from the standpoint of any typical corporation, the idea here is next year's profit margin and next year's profit must outgrow the previous profit. Every year, you're raising that profit margin. If you take a step back and look at that, there's no way that you can raise it unless you're raising the debt ceiling and find more ways for people to consume more, but at the same time have less access to resources. It's not like you're making more. And when people think that they're making more and they raise the cost, they raise the minimum wage or raise your pay, it's offset by the cost of living, which is offset by everything else in terms of the value of the dollar. So the name of the game is to constantly increase everything across the board, and you can never catch up. You can never catch up. Go ahead, Chief. I think you had something.
Yeah, another part of that is the antithesis of that is making you who you are, you know, and giving you the money and giving you the ropes, you know, to hang yourself with, essentially. You know, because, you know, you have the exposure we need to get the job done that needs to be done to increase our profits on the back end. So we're going to make you the millionaire. We're going to give you 200,000, 300,000. And because, you know, it's coming right back to us. So you're the conduit, you're the caveat. You know what I mean? We're gonna put that bread in your account because we know you don't know how to spend it. You know what I mean? So, and that's what, you know, a big debate is when we talk about the reparations is, and that's what Fred Hampton was getting at back in the day when they came at him with starting a credit union. He was like, "You ain't got education, you got nothing." You know.
All right, let me move on here to build off some more concepts here. So social scientists. A social scientist uses scientific principles to analyze social systems, draw conclusions, and implement strategies toward effecting change or sway the opinion in a given population. A social scientist uses both qualitative and quantitative methods for their research. The quantitative method is interested in studying the human phenomenon through statistical analysis and data evaluation. The quantitative method draws its conclusion from verifiable experiments. The qualitative method favors direct observation, the analysis of text, interviews, and communication with its subjects in order to understand social phenomena. We must all take note of the power of embedded social engineering. And this is important because not too many people know of the concept of a social scientist. And from that position, they basically deal with different trends, different methods, and different ways to can manipulate and control the masses through various technological channels, whether it be through marketing, whether it be through the food you eat. Everything is about how you can manipulate and control the masses of people. So a social scientist is a very key position to that. Brother Cole, go ahead. You had a question?
Yeah, just to provide some behind the scenes insight into that. I actually do work in marketing at like a tech company, and you know, we all got to eat. But without exposure to this, would not believe the amount of not only information we're able to pull just on individuals from a single landing on a web page about their demographics, their psychographics, their beliefs, their interests, their location, their gender, their age, and everything, but also the ways that we use psychology and like basically evolutionary irrationality to manipulate people, right? Even when we think we're being perfectly rational, we are primed by our evolutionary history to make certain heuristic or like biased mistakes in decision making. And the entire field of marketing or propaganda on the other side of the coin is designed to manipulate people without their knowledge of that. I could go on and on about this, but yeah, there's just so much that like, yeah, of course you're preaching the truth again, Brother War.
All right, brother. Next one here, pending. We have to go over the concept of pending in order to draw the connection here. About to take place, impeding. This implies a forthcoming event. In the case of social political change, the pending is the work being done that leads up to a revolution. The work is critical to create a conducive atmosphere for change. The atmosphere conditions must occur to sprout what was seeded. This means when we plant seeds of change in the minds of the masses, we are intentional with our projected harvesting. Our seeding for revolution must have the same approach. And the reason why I put it that way is because too often people have an expectation for things to just simply change because they're bad, not knowing that the bottom line to that is that everything has to be dealt with by design. If you want change, then you have to work toward that change. That is that pending revolution. By removing the concept of the masses of the idea of pending a revolution, then we lose the connection between going from step A to Z. And we just have this emotional instant gratification process that we think is supposed to take place. So therefore we don't prepare, we don't plan, we don't execute, we don't put things in perspective in terms of going from one level of operation to the next level of operation. And also this tends to work against a population in terms of our thought process by removing pending, simply because we have such instant access to data at this point. Having so instant access to data, it goes into the fact that oftentimes our ability just to sit back and actually calculate and have the ability to be visionaries for any period of time has been dwarfed because it's so easy to just ask Siri or ask Alexa or whatever for an answer. And so we've been accustomed to receiving an answer, but not recognizing the difference between an answer and a solution. Getting an answer does not mean that you have received a solution. An answer is just a reply, and that reply can be inundated with partial truths and falsehood. And because we are, again, so inundated in the information age right now. The time it takes you to dissect and figure out what is truth and extract truth, especially dealing with the psychology of how things work and how we view things. By the time you figure one thing out, you're being inundated with another lie. It was sprinkled with a little bit of truth, and you just go all over the map, and you never really be able to pin things down to the point to where you can work toward a feasible plan of action that's going to take you all the way through to see solutions start being carried out. Chief, go ahead and jump in on that.
Yes, sir. That goes into how somebody broke down prejudice to me. And it's not in the fact that what's being said isn't the truth, but it's part of the truth. So you're telling half of the truth, you know what I mean? Niggas like watermelon and chicken, but you're not giving the whole truth. So in itself, it makes it a form of oppression. And so it's important to be holistic in your approach, and it's your responsibility to be holistic in your approach to any given situation where you're dealing with oppressed peoples. Just for that simple fact that if you go about telling half truths or convenient truths, you know better than the next man.
Right. And one thing I want to mention, and it's important here in terms of what I underlined in that area of pending, dealing with seeding, sprouting, and harvesting. The reason why I use that analogy is because oftentimes you hear people, that just kind of get into a situation where they're dropping information. Hey, I'm saying I dropped a seed, I dropped a jewel, but we don't recognize that is a step in the process. Things have to be carried through. Oftentimes you hear us stuck in the mentality of talking about dropping seeds or planning information or planning this or starting this or coming up with an idea. But again, because we are so caught up in an information age to where things have to happen so fast, it keeps us from having the mentality to just take a step back, look at things and follow things through. So when we're engaging in any form of social endeavors to where we want to empower the people, we have to be able to deal with the seeding, the sprouting, and then the harvesting of something. And this goes into the aspect of recognizing, like, even if we look at the agricultural world, when it comes to a capitalistic mentality and a weapon and how it's weaponized against us, they create crops that will not produce seeds, so that you have to go back to them and replant and reharvest every year with these genetically modified harvests that don't even create their own seeds. And that same thing happens, people, what you got to recognize happens on a physical, mental, spiritual, and psychological level as it applies to people. The goal here is to prevent us from being able to have collective growth and collective empowerment, so that each generation is disconnected from the previous generation. So therefore, the elders are not able to connect the youths, and the youths don't get the wisdom from the elders, and so you have a generational gap. Creating that generational gap, you now lose that experience marker. Losing that experience marker makes you reinvent the wheel, because you take for granted that your thought pattern is not, and what you're coming up with is not something that's already been done. And so there we get even caught up into outdated tactics in terms of how we want to move forward and address social change in the world, because there's a disconnect with those that have went down this path and those that are starting down this path. And so the same thing applies to that. So when we talk about the seeding, the sprouting, and the harvesting, also think of the young, the middle, and the old. And so it's important to draw those connections. So with that, let's discuss a few things in regards to the Black Panther Party programs. So what we're going to go over here was extracted from a book called Survival Pending Revolution: The History of the Black Panther Party by Paul Akibalon. The breakfast programs, the survival programs, were intended to preserve the BPP's viability within the Black and progressive communities. The BPP's first free breakfast program was for school children opened January the 20th, 1969 in St. Augustine Episcopal Church in Oakland, California. The party newspaper began advertising the program for program volunteers and equipment in the winter of 1968. The community initiatives were first instituted in California. For example, the Vallejo, California branch wrote an article for the Panther newspaper stating that it had opened a free breakfast program for children. It was also soliciting donations. The second article also announces the expulsion of 26 individuals in order to guarantee the party's survival and to set correct examples for the people. The expelled members were characterized as reactionaries. That's important because you don't too often hear about the process, the internal process that goes on within the Panther Party to see to it that people are serious about the work that they're doing. The Vallejo chapter had modeled its actions on the events that occurred in Oakland 2 months previously. Clearly, this local branch had understood and demonstrated the nexus amongst community action programs, tighter discipline, and political survival. Breakfast programs also became mandatory for all branches throughout the country. And the point here is that the idea was to create accountability for the chapters to actually do the work in the community. And those people that served under the brand of the Black Panther or the Panther Party had to do the work, had to hold themselves accountable, had to be disciplined, had to participate. The Panthers also used the programs to demonstrate the need for improving nutritional standards in the Black community. The Black Breakfast Program National Coordinator claimed that 22 chapters and branches around the country had served 20,000 children or meals by November the 14th, 1969. This estimate is not unreasonable considering the 22 offices that offered breakfast programs. These figures would mean that approximately 688 children per office were fed each month. Many chapters were located in cities with large Black populations. Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Kansas, San Francisco, Oakland, Denver, Indianapolis, Milwaukee, Jersey City, New Haven, and Boston. In addition to many of these large cities had multiple sites that could easily have accommodated more than 100 children at any one time. Father Frank Curran in San Diego was the first supporter of the breakfast program in Southern California. So that was dropped in there because that's a bit of knowledge that a lot of people are unaware of that was taking place here in San Diego. Now, moving into the elements of counterintelligence. The FBI feared that the breakfast program would be used to teach children to hate police and spread anti-white propaganda. Churches that allowed the Panthers to use their facility to receive special government attention. The FBI records show that the Bureau responded by contacting Curran's supervisors. A month later, Father Curran was transferred to New Mexico. The FBI pronounced itself satisfied that the priest had been neutralized. The FBI also mailed anonymous letters to public officials and persons that they thought capable of swaying public opinion against party efforts to initiate and maintain community action programs across the country. And it's important to know that because basically when the Panthers were working toward self-sufficiency and self-determination as a collective, the feeding the people had to do with not depending and be codependent upon the government, but doing what we can for ourselves, creating a situation where we would take care of our people and not be have to wait on assistance. And from that standpoint, what you're doing is you're teaching the people how to collectively organize and operate. And that's not something that from a capitalist imperialist standpoint that you want the people to be connected with. You don't want the people to be connecting power. You don't want all power to the people. And that's one of the reasons why we say that, because when we start recognizing the true power we got when we collectively work together across all dynamics, then we can take things back into the proper perspective and proper direction that we can do. Now we can sit at the seat of table and make demands, as opposed to asking, as opposed to begging, or as opposed to just, again, dealing with survival and being stuck in a mode of survival. Another thing that was important, and this is just to hit on the food program and the liberation schools. The liberation schools began in 1969. They became crucial element to the organizing drive. Liberation schools were a familiar concept in the Black community because they had been an organizing tactic used by the Southern civil rights groups. The Southern Liberation Schools had served as a central location for explaining the civil rights movement to community members. They had also been used as an ad hoc education site and as a recruiting device for demonstrations and voting right drives. Party liberation schools resulted from a good relation that began with the free breakfast program. Panthers began to encourage children to return for other activities. San Francisco Liberation School served 25 children daily. The weekly curriculum was as follows. This is something you don't hear much as well. Monday was history, Tuesday culture day, Wednesday field trips, Thursday revolutionary films, Friday current events. Songs and games were utilized to convey Panther messages. Children learned how to recite and explain the 10-point programming platform. In Staten Island, New York, children aged 7 to 12 were instructed in the roots and essence of the people's revolution. And see, through the program, the breakfast programs and the feeding programs, you started working toward creating a politicized youth who would grow up and know how to engage and know that they're expected to be involved in community operation. Because like right now, when people, the average person now, when they think of a family structure, they basically think of, well, my goal and my job in terms of raising my children is simply keeping a roof over their head, making sure they get off to school properly, making sure they go to college or go to trade school or something to where they get a good job so that they can do the same for their children. But we leave out the idea and the necessary element of doing community action in work, as opposed to looking at that as being charity work. It's supposed to be the work that we must do. We must build as a community. The average family structure does not make that or incorporate that within their family environment. This is why we don't know our next door neighbors. This is why we know a whole lot more about what's going on in the virtual environment than we do about our own damn neighborhoods and communities, because we are taught, again, to be individuals, and we're taught to not have a collective empowerment point of view. That also couples right back to what we started out talking about when we said the renter's mentality. When you don't have ownership or stake in your community, because your mentality is, I'm here for a limited amount of time, I'm too busy to be involved in that, or always have an excuse for engaging the next person. From that standpoint, then you're stuck behind that virtual environment, and everything ties right back into that individual. And through that, you will never even grasp the concept of anything outside of survival. Go ahead, Brother Cole.
Yeah, just to sort of hammer home that point, one thing that I recently learned, there's even been psychological studies that just mere exposure to the concept of money, like having pictures of money or having money in the room, primes us psychologically to act more individualistically, to be more hostile and less cooperative. That's like how capitalism takes advantage of these like psychological things that I mentioned before. It's really insidious.
Right, and also make sure you recognize the difference between currency and money, because we don't use real money anymore. What we're looking at is a note, a tender note, a note of legal tender. Is that actually money? Is that backed by anything? So there's a big difference between money and currency. In a capitalist society, currency must circulate in order to continue to stay alive. The moment currency sits still, it loses its value, which is the difference in why in a capitalist society, the dollar continues to drop, because if it does not circulate, it loses value. And so real money would not lose value, but currency is only designed to live if it's flowing. Go ahead, Chief Karan.
I just wanted to piggyback on that in the ownership mentality versus the rentership mentality. Just to say that, moving towards the ownership mentality and having a stake in, the politics where you stay, it needs to be just that. Like you actually have to have a political stake in the space you're holding up. And that's the important part, you know. And that's something that the renters could even get on, actually, even though they don't own the stake, you know, of where they at and paying where they need to be at. The politics cannot be left out of the picture. You know what I mean? As far as getting in tune with your geographic location of where you're physically at, this conversation needs to come with a responsibility.
Responsibility and accountability. We have to get our people to recognize both, because responsibility, let me just say this is to draw distinction, simply because a lot of times we tend to use the same word to mean to have two words to have the same meaning when it's not that. Responsibility, as it applies to what we're dealing with in terms of our what we need to do to move forward as a society. Responsibility just simply means who I can point the finger at, who was responsible for that failure, who was responsible for that success. Accountability means that not only are you the person that's involved or in charge, but that you have took ownership of that situation, of that business, of that model, of that control, or of that responsibility, and made it your own. So you treat it like it is your own vision, your own life. And so having accountability to our community means that without me doing my part, the community will not survive. I've taken accountability and ownership of the position of the community, of the position of our people. So from that standpoint, I become a true servant of the people, because now I hold myself accountable for the well-being of my environment. So
Absolutely. You
we
know,
have to make sure we get that.
Yes, sir. We could be out here buying houses all day. You know,
right.
Yeah, it could be a black place and a white space all day, or whatever you want to call it. But you know, yeah, what did Kwame Ture say? I had to be there. I was there. You know,
Yeah.
I'm there in that space. But what does that mean? You know?
Yeah. All right, let me move on here. The curriculum that most liberation schools consisted of basic academic skills and current events gleaned from newspapers and party literature. Community volunteers and Panthers staffed the schools. Some volunteers were college students who were able to impart a semblance of professional instruction at their locations. Mandatory attendance in political education classes was essential part of the BPP's rectification campaign. Political education classes started in 1966 with Seal and Newton began reading Malcolm X, Francis Fanon, and Chairman Mao. The Panther liberation programs, PE programs, sometimes fell short of its goal because many members had received an inferior school education, public school education. Public schools had not prepared most of them for critical study. And see, that's the point. We have to recognize that a lot of times the way the school system goes about things, it is more about memorization and more about being able to pass a test than it is about the actual concept, gauging and grasping concepts and critical thinking and critical study. Bobby Seale recognizes reality in 1973 when he acknowledged that many people in the collective need remedial reading and math. Seale recommended dividing the PE classes into two groups, an advanced and a secondary group, because a large portion of the comrades in the secondary group did not finish high school. So even now with us finishing high school and a lot of us not necessarily being in that position, our ability to critically think and look at the bigger picture and engage and be involved in making change is not there. We don't have, a lot of times we don't have the patience in the essence and the discipline to engage in reading, study, and just growing ourselves to be able to be as very beneficial to the movement. This kind of goes into one of the things we discussed within the Panther Party, talking about being willing, capable, and ready. Too many people jump into involvement with anything simply because they're willing, but not recognizing that you have to be at a certain level in terms of what it is you're bringing to the table and know how to do that and know how to collectively do that. In other words, when you talk about organizing, simply being a part of an organization doesn't make you a true organizer. It simply means that you are a participant in an organization. But if you don't know how to take initiative, if you don't know how to just fill in the gaps, if you don't know how to move and operate and work within certain administration concepts, then you're just basically just stuck. And at that point, was it your did your willingness just drive you to be involved in other words, were you reactionary in regards to your emotionalization simply because you want change to happen? It's obvious. We see things not working and we want to be involved. But are you not only willing but ready to sacrifice your time, ready to sacrifice play, ready to sacrifice your spending habits and have accountable spending and get engaged and involved in community? And are you capable of operating at a higher level than what you did before you was involved in helping others? Because you have to be willing to work on yourself in order to expect that same thing out of other people. And so that's important that we recognize that it's more to being involved and more to collective change than just simply a willing participant. Community P's, let's see where did I leave off on that. Okay, the community PE classes were for the purpose of teaching the general public about the 10-point platform, survival programs, and different current events that appeared in the BPP newspaper or the mainstream press. Ranking file members were encouraged to write editorials and articles for the BPP newspaper that articulated organizational history and ideology. Now, an important part of that a lot of people skip through, and it's not just for the Panthers, but this is just in general. How many of us actually, just out of the love of taking in knowledge and being able to articulate and being visionary and work toward things, right? I don't mean because you have to write because it's what you do for your job, but actually love the concept of writing. Because when you write things down, it pulls things out, it pulls stuff out of you. It makes you think about what's going on. Oftentimes people may just say they have this bright idea and they just have to tell somebody and they spit it out and it may sound like a good idea. Now, if you ask them to commit that to paper, they start thinking about this in terms of following it through. This goes back to the difference between when we talk about planting a seed where somebody's dropping knowledge versus all of dealing with sprouting that knowledge and creating wisdom from it and then putting it into action, which goes into what the Panthers also call define, develop what you define, and then defend it, which means to mature it and see it through and make sure the next generation can grasp that concept and move with it as well. So these are the things we have to be aware of. Go ahead, Chief, you had something?
Yes, sir. I will say reading has it's built a lot of confidence. Just reading and be able to have addiction beyond, what I've just been exposed to on a day-to-day basis, gives me more confidence in articulating myself when I write. So when I put stuff down on paper, on the internet, I feel like I have a higher sense of freedom through the research that I do to be able to articulate things in the way that I feel like it would best suit the point I'm trying to make. And so
correct.
I can't stress the education part enough, the research part.
Right. And I think most people just take basic academic education for granted simply because when we think about it from the position of what? Getting a job. We don't educate and grow just for the sake of the love of growth of knowledge and wisdom. We tend to be drawn like cattle and sheeple to simply read what is necessary to make more money. And then what you do when you make more money, you want to read and you want to spend more money. And now you want to read some more or study some more so that you can make more money so that you can keep up with your spending and consumption habits. That is a perpetual cycle of destruction and leeching and blood sucking, if you really look at it properly. That is, your drive to better yourself should not be based upon simply making more money. You should not define yourself by how much money you can make or currency you can circulate. to put it better. Now, Hugh P. Newton, this is an extract here from Hugh P. Newton, The Correct Handling of a Revolution. The main purpose of the Vanguard Group should be to raise the consciousness of the masses through educational programs and certain physical activities the party will participate in. The sleeping masses must be bombarded with the correct approach to struggle through the activities of the Vanguard Party. Therefore, the masses must know that the party exists. That's super important because we have to be out there. The party must use all means available to get this information across to the masses. If the masses do not know, do not have the knowledge of the party, it will be impossible for the masses to follow the programs of the party. Think of survival as being all the experience prior to revolution. As a condition of this end goal, as a revolutionary, you must be able to achieve total height of awareness, and that's the freedom from being free. Let me say that again. You must be able to achieve total height of awareness, and that's the freedom from being free. You must accept the fact that the very thing you are seeking will and have dedicated your life to may not be attainable to you if you are doing your part. And that's what we mean when we talk about the freedom from wanting to be free, because when you talk about the living the lifestyle, the word you have spending time and you have things that you want to occupy your time with, which is what makes people go out and consume anyway, because you don't know what to do with time. And from that standpoint, either the industry or the environment will keep you busy, the capitalists will keep you busy, or when you're not busy, now you're spending money. The idea is to keep you constantly involved in that cycle. So what we deal with as it applies to teaching people and raising the consciousness of the masses is to create the concept of true freedom and liberation. But as you engage and be involved in this, now you must accept the fact that your life is not your own, because you are now accountable to the well-being and the goodwill of others. So let me go in and explain this concept. By being a revolutionary, you will be creating conditions that will jeopardize your livelihood and possibly get you killed or arrested. At the least, sacrifice your life as it belongs to the people, and the time is not a luxury you are able to freely burn as you did before. In order to have full commitment to social change, you must not have any limitations on change. This does not mean that you are chasing debt, but it does imply that you embrace being a sacrifice for sacrificing your personal freedoms for the sake of collective freedoms. And that's the key there, is because, again, getting us to think like individuals, we are completely turned off to the idea of collective growth and collective empowerment. So therefore, our quote unquote communities are made up of individuals all working and running the rat race. So you may live and occupy a certain sector as a collective of people, but you're all thinking like individuals, and therefore you don't have the power to make change in your community. In other words, accountability to definition, defining, and defending. I'm sorry, it should have been defending, by serving as a living example of having the appetite for continual personal and collective growth. And that's the key to what we were saying, because the masses of people, the appetite has to change, because our appetites are typically geared toward consumption. And so now when you change that appetite and make it geared toward continual personal growth and collective growth, now those things that you used to can be tied down with in terms of consumption is no longer there. You don't have that desire to do that. And so we have to be able to change that in our people. The creation of new organizations would not bring us any closer to achieving empowerment if the lessons from the past organizing are not learned. And this is why we talked about connecting the different generations and making sure they stay connected. The nostalgia of outdated strategies and tactical mistakes remain a constant regardless of the name of the movement. That's because you have to learn from what was done in the past. We have to be students of that. If we are not applying the material dialectics from historical achievements with current technologies, and the political environment in order to address social engineering, then we are still riding a hamster wheel. The ability to generate motion does not guarantee production. Being vested in development and collective direction is the price for liberation. Having control of our destiny only comes by way of directing the course of operation, which means we have to see things through. We have to recognize that pending revolution means that you are prepping and preparing for revolution, meaning that when you talk about planting that seed, that you recognize that you have to water that seed. You recognize that the type of soil that you have to plant that seed in has to provide the nutrients for that seed. You recognize that during the sprouting phase, it has to receive enough sunlight, and all of the conditions of that environment have to be right for revolution. You are creating that. That means you're staying and you are cultivating the environment to produce that. That is what pending revolution means. Pending revolution don't mean you sit back and wait for things to completely collapse and assume that because they collapse, or that the conditions will create a collapse, that now all of a sudden we're going to be in a mode of revolution. You see, so we have to move away from that gap of critical thinking and critical consciousness that will take us from one position to the next position. Let me see here what I left off here. Regardless of the name given to the perpetual capacitance of the unconscious ocean, a stored charge provides nothing against a kinetic sea of oppression. And the importance of me stating that is because, again, when you talk about, let me just put this in a different term. The capacitance simply means having the ability in terms of what you are capable of, provided that you know your energy, your stored energy and its power, what can be done. But simply having that capacitance or simply having that potential as a people does not mean that it will produce any actual work and any actual development. So you have to recognize that, because again, capacitance in as it applies to the unconsciousness and us being in a condition of sleep is not going to automatically guarantee that we remove ourselves from oppression simply because we have that great potential. A great potential does not ever mean it will develop anything. Again, that's that seed. You may have this powerful seed, but if you're not cultivating that, the growth of that, then you're stuck in that capacitance stage, and that energy just will dissipate. It will never turn into anything. And that's what we're dealing with. Now, a key in terms of the weaponization that's used against people, used against us as a masses, is conscious sedation. As applied to social engineering, the reducing of social anxiety through events that numb the collective awareness of trending oppressive conditions and circumstances by slowly harnessing the people into division and polarizing. The phase of pending gets removed, and therefore the proper transitional mode leading to a sustainable revolution is not achieved without world power interference. And so from that standpoint, what we're talking about is we're talking about how you keep a population asleep and use use these conditions of consumption against us, use the conditions of us fighting each other against one another. You gradually remove the concept of us recognizing what true organizing is. So this interference prevents the transformation of survival to living. All right, so now what we want to talk about is the culture of revolutionary patterns. And I want you to recognize the trifactor effect that's going on within this. This goes again into what we talk about, another way of looking at the seed, the sprout, and the harvest. Static. At this level, we are dealing with the dormant storage of the human will in its potential stage, simply aware of a problem, but not yet be sparked toward any means of countering the conditions of oppression. The masses are fed byproducts of coping mechanisms in order to keep the population asleep. And that's the point here, is that we're inundated with things that will help us cope with our conditions. This is why I use that example of the pharmaceutical industry in terms of teaching you and embedding you with the ability to deal with sicknesses. Is kind of like suppression, basically cough suppressant, or what they call medicine. Oftentimes when you want to go and you call yourself buying cold medicine, you're not buying medicine. That word again is being used wrongly. That is not medicine, that is suppressant. And all suppressant does is help you deal with the symptoms of the sickness, but it's not curing the sicknesses. So too often society is basically dealing with suppression, and that's what we don't recognize. And suppression from that standpoint is coping, is a coping mechanism. Now dynamic. At this level, people begin to be fed up with the constant examples of oppression, oppressive reminders that for every step gained, an individual's 2 steps are subtracted from the collective. Let me say that again. For every step gained as individuals, 2 steps are subtracted as a collective. We start to realize that freedoms being exchanged for civil liberties is not a valid solution to long-term problems. Also, raising the minimum wage, like we said earlier, does not offset the cost of living, because as one increases, so does the other, in an ever-climbing debt ceiling, making the value of the dollar lessen with each legislative action. So now we're moving again from the static to the dynamic. The last one of the trifecta is the kinetic. At this level, people see that people see the only way to change the condition is to heed themselves accountable for making this change. They start to see that we have traded our control for false securities, and that true safety only comes from not being afraid to engage directly. Our will becomes the foundation for change, and therefore we are ready to put our destiny back in our hands. So we have to move our people from static to dynamic to kinetic, from seed to sprout to harvest. Another element here, the revolutionary cultivation exists in the following stages. Thought. The word itself comes from the Greek word thought, which is an Egyptian triform god of wisdom, magic, or science, and the measurement of regulation of events and of the time scribed. Once we activate our own thought process and accept the basis of being at war, which is what we mean when we talk about in the position of survival, we have to know that we are at war. Then we can forge a proper defense, but not until we escape the false perception that we are victims can the true power arise. So for one, you have to accept and you have to engage the situation knowing that you're on a battlefield. Once you accept the fact that you're on a battlefield, then you will think like a soldier. Once you think like a soldier, now you'll form a defense and an offense. And now you have to also employ and imply strategy, conduction, and tactics. Too often we miss that middle piece, which again is what we talk about when we say pending revolution. Survival, pending revolution. Strategy, conduction, tactics. Too often people jump from strategy to tactics, not understanding that conduction, which is the flow that you go from one stage to the next, has to be there in order to see the process through. So the same thing goes into that. You have to have strategy, conduction, and tactics. So as we recognize that, we take ourselves from the victimization mentality and are able to move to higher levels. Now, the next one here is the will. Once the people wake up to a kinetic way of life, their will can guide them to perseverance and generational change as taught in Panther training as foundational generational advancement. This is what we work toward within the Panther movement as we, as Panthers, make sure we're able to pass on the proper knowledge to the next generation, and that we don't have this gap in terms of the elder, the middle, and the youth of growing our movements. The third one here being action. Through direct action as a lifestyle with the active culture of resistance shaping, the people are at the table, the table of power, making revolutionary change. Reform is exposed and has replaced itself with being a strategy and now recognized as a tactical operation. The people move into the knowledge of battlefield objectives, and the dirty tricks of the CIA is basic language decoded in everyday cooler talk. And let me break that down, because again, we started talking about how basically when you're dealing with counterintelligence and counter consciousness, really, as it applies to the masses recognizing the true power that we have, and even the organizers, how we use. And so from that standpoint, we're basically saying once we move to a position of action at a collective level, the concepts or the dirty tricks that the CIA have used on the population is decoded. And it's just something that we all know. At this point, the people are not just but ready and able to take on self-determination. That goes back to what we stated earlier when we talk about being willing, ready, and capable or able to deal with something. You have to deal with that, all three, in terms of that trifactor. We are no longer afraid of what's on the other side, and willing to build from the ground up with full awareness of the work it will take to draft a new political environment outside of the sheeple safety net. Now, both of these together, those three patterns that we talked about, the three trifactors: static, dynamic, and kinetic, thought, will, and action, they both come together to form the two-form triads of what we call intentional design. So you use these together, and then at that point, now you recognize the fact that there has to be a process in place. This is the required process to make production a tangible recipe towards means of freedom for the people, instead of it being used to control the people and foster generations of codependency. Again, the idea is to move away from that. So we have to recognize how that works. So in closing here, in addressing means of production, it is important that we realize, as a person, you must harness the spirit of create, design, and build, another trifactor here, in order to fight the subliminal attack of consumption embedded in our society that keeps us living beyond the means and stuck in the mode of survival. This is the mindset required to pull ourselves up the stage of social revolution. We can't be reactionaries in the building of a better future. It takes planning, the same concept of planning that is used to keep us in psychological bondage. Self-determination takes intentional movement and action on all levels. All power to the people. And what I wanted to make known here is the graphics that's behind the document is just in giving recognition to we lost a comrade here recently, Brother Patrick Jeremy. And so I left the information here also on his funeral for those that want to attend. But just in the revolutionary spirit of keeping the organization and the information alive and the Panther Party alive, we want to just give honor to our fallen comrades from that standpoint. Does anybody got any questions or comments or anything they would like me to cover more in depth real quick? And again, for those that didn't hear me at the very beginning, if you put your email in the text, email in the chat, then I will send you the document. Okay, somebody had something they wanted to say?
I was just saying thank you for that, Brother War. Brother Patrick, when I walked up on y'all at the Emoja Gardens, I was actually on the couch up in Carlsbad, man. I was actually sick, and Coyote was like, "Come down, we got the Black Panthers in here," and it was you and Brother Patrick, and I had a torn Achilles at the time. I came through it in cast.
I remember that.
Yeah, I brought my dog Huey, man, and some of the and the knee scooter. and you and Brother Patrick were the first Panthers I met, and here we are, 2022. So I appreciate you for that, man, and it's a very large impact that brother had, on me personally and just on the world, man. So I appreciate you for honoring the ancestor in the graphic.
Yes, sir. All right. Anybody got any questions? I also on the very last page is just a few resources to get more information about what we're talking about, as well as our link tree to get more information on the Panther Party. All right. Well, that's it. I appreciate everybody being tentative and paying attention in class, learning. The idea here again is recognizing that we have to make that pending part of the process in order to ever work toward revolution. It's just not going to haphazardly happen. Capitalism, by capitalism ever falling or collapsing doesn't automatically mean that things are going to get better and be better. We have to be that actual change. Brother Anthony, go ahead.
Appreciate your lessons, appreciate your wisdom, Brother War. All power to the people.
All power to the people, brother.
So the question I have is, for those of us who are listening and understanding that there's a difference between understanding what needs to be done and actually walking that path, actually doing it, what do you suggest as a few first steps to kind of get out of the old mentalities and the old habits and start to build new ones? What's some first steps that you would suggest for us?
Well, the first steps I would suggest again is this even goes into why I talked about not simply just reading, but writing down what you comprehend, start writing down what you see to be a way for change to take place. Because what it does is it causes the mind to spin, and it causes the mind to think about things from the standpoint of being visionary. It also, I would say, collectively build study groups together, collectively work with other people and change the dynamic and the spirit of what I call the influence of people that you may even be around if it's not conducive to growth of where you want to go. Because mind you, keep in mind that when we talk about being organizers and then serving the people, these are separate things. Not everybody is going to be conscious or obviously majority of people not going to come to the level that we're working toward right now. But we as organizers, our goal is to raise the collective consciousness of the people. So we have to create the appetite. The more people see you operating at a higher level and a higher capacity, and you have an embracing spirit, and we have to understand the psychology behind this, because if you don't have an embracing spirit, this is why we must learn psychology as organizers. Then what you would do is create a wedge between you and others that you are attempting to uplift, because what they're doing is now seeing you as thinking that you're better than them. And then from that standpoint, a person will go in the opposite direction simply because it's counter or toward what the ego that you have. So we have to make sure that as we operate in whatever knowledge we take in, we're doing it to better ourselves so that we can better the people. It's not about being better as a person than anybody. It's about doing what's necessary to get to be where you need to be to help the next person. So you engage and you find ways to connect the dots between the environments that most of our people find themselves in, and how to teach them and get them to, like we talked about, dropping seeds. Now you want to go back and not just simply drop seeds, but you want to deal with the cultivation of that process. So you be the one that is constantly creating that. And just like how it applies to dealing with anything that is dealing with that needs to grow, you have to be willing to have the patience and the time it takes to see that it happens. This is why we talked about foundational generational advancement. Don't expect too much too soon. Don't push yourself to want to see change right now and have this instant gratification mentality. We must embrace the process of revolution, that pending portion. And as we do that and we all do our part, and as each one teach one, and we take on that capacity, then we're making progress. And also, last thing, and then I let Brother Nick speak here, is recognize that we must outpace the pace of oppression. What that means is that we have to engage in the multiplier effect. Everything in life is replicating and is duplicating itself, and it is attempting to regenerate and grow at a greater rate. Capitalism works off the model of each year I want greater profits. In order to have greater profits, I have to create greater consumptions. It is a replication process of constant growth. We have to have the same mentality and the same process in terms of our growth. That is just what happens in nature, period, is that either you grow or you're consumed. So it's one or the other, and we have to recognize that. So that in order to outpace the pace of oppression, we have to be willing, and this is why you have to change the appetite. As you change the appetite, then it becomes automatic. So I hope that answered your question.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Go ahead, Nick.
I just had a thought kind of coming off of what Anthony just shared as far as transitioning into action. I don't remember where I heard this, but I heard someone talk about being in the habit of breaking rules. You know, and that doesn't mean go so chaos, but like just being in the habit with being comfortable having the radical views we have, being comfortable being sort of a challenging space. I found that in BMX helped me like sort of be used to being places you weren't supposed to be. If you're riding street, you know, you're constantly sort of trespassing to ride on this little thing, and that sort of habit made it comfortable transitions when it came to being a socialist voice in a capitalist room or things of that. And I think just like that habit forming stuff, we can work towards building the habit of revolutionary actions.
Right. And that kind of goes back into, again, what the weaponization of using the basic system designs against themselves. And let me say that also helped me to remember a point about I would suggest everyone study Project MK Ultra. And the reason why I say that is because the basis of that project, if you go back and look at all of the case files, it had to do with studying the psychological basic human behavior and learning how to weaponize human behavior against itself. This is why I talked about the social sciences, because from the standpoint of controlling a population, you step back and you find out what makes people tick. And you use that and you weaponize that very natural nature against the people. And so from that standpoint, everybody operates outside of their conscious being, based upon what you're being bombarded with as a population. And we don't realize it. We're so far removed from really the deep science and study of social engineering that we don't understand at all what's really being done to us. And that experiment that took place that long ago has a whole lot of wealth of information in terms of the capabilities that were going on at that time. Just imagine how it is operating now. And that's what's super important about just knowing that. Any other questions before we get off? All right, I definitely appreciate everyone. Again, let's just continue to build and grow and make this happen.
When the ears of the student are ready to hear, then cometh lips to fill them with wisdom. Ears ready to hear.
I believe that we've made great progress from when this country didn't even know it had a racial problem.
Cometh lips. Nothing rests. Everything moves. Everything vibrates. Everything is in motion. Nothing is at rest.
I'm an entertainer.
It is time for us to do what we have been doing, and that time is every day. Every day it is time for us to agree that
I'm an entertainer.
44% of Americans approve of your job. What's your new strategy?
to remain consistent in fighting the American people.
An entertainer. I'm an entertainer.
It is time for us to do what we have been doing, and that time is every day.
I'm an entertainer.
When the ears of the student are ready to hear, everything is in motion. Here.
We got more and more folk and less power. coalition under leadership. Somebody.
Entertainer. I'm an entertainer.
We don't want any more black pastors coming in here.
Nothing rests. Everything moves. Everything vibrates. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same.
I am we.
Everything has its pair of opposites.
I'm an entertainer.
Identical in nature. Like
I am we.
and unlike
I'm an entertainer.
are the same, are identical in nature.
I am we.
I mean, you all have laid out the case very nicely about what's at stake. And now we're here. So what will you do?
I am we.
Right. My whole program is geared toward educating the mass of the people.
I am we.
And free health clinic that we have, people in the community are going to run that
I am
clinic.
we.
And after a while, we're going to give them that clinic, and we're going to move on to higher levels. Because we understand the difference between the vanguard and the people. We're going to keep out there setting up some new examples, some new revolutionary programs that the people can basically relate to, because basically people are revolutionary.
I am we. If you met an African in ancient times and asked him who he was, he would simply reply, I am we. This is revolutionary suicide.
To fill them with wisdom.